Someone was living in their attic. For days, maybe weeks, the Gruber family heard footsteps above their heads, creaking floorboards and the sound of movement in the darkness. Andreas Gruber searched but found nothing. But the sounds continued. And then, on March 31st, 1922, everyone in the house ended up dead. This is the story of Hinterkaifeck, Germany's most terrifying unsolved murder. It's late March 1922 in rural Bavaria, rolling hills dotted with farms, forests thick with pine, and communities where neighbors know each other's names. About 70 kilometers north of Munich sits a farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. The name means behind Kaifeck, or behind the nearest hamlet. It is isolated, surrounded by dense woods, the kind of place where you could hear silence. 6 people call this farm home. Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, the patriarch, a stern man with a reputation for cruelty and secrets. His wife, Cäzilia, 72, weathered by decades of hard farm life. Their widowed daughter, Viktoria Gabriel, 35, living at the farm with her 2 children, 7-year-old Cäzilia and 2-year-old Josef. And on the final day of March, a new maid arrives, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner, just starting her first shift. She'll be dead within hours, though. But the terror at Hinterkaifeck doesn't begin on March 31st. It begins months earlier, with things that just don't make sense. 6 months before the murders, the previous maid quits abruptly. She tells people the house is haunted, that she's heard strange noises coming from the attic, footsteps, shuffling around, and other sounds that just shouldn't be there. The family dismisses her fears, but then they start hearing it too. In early March, Andreas finds something that shocks him stiff. Footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the edge of the forest towards the farm, toward a door with a broken lock that opens into the machine room. He follows the tracks. They lead him right up to the farm, but there are no footprints leading away. Andreas searches the machine room, the house and the barn, but there was nothing and no one to be found. But the feeling lingered. Someone was here, or maybe someone still is. The strange occurrences continued. Days later, Andreas finds a newspaper on the property, a Munich paper. No one in the family or in their local area subscribes to it, and no one knows how it got there. Then keys go missing. The dog would bark at odd hours, and at night, when the house settles into darkness, the family would hear it again. Footsteps, in the attic, moving slowly, deliberately. Andreas tells neighbors about what's going on, and they offer to help, to investigate, to call the police, but Andreas refuses. Pride, perhaps, or stubbornness, or maybe some part of him doesn't want to know what's really up there. On March 31st, Viktoria's daughter, young Cäzilia, tells a schoolmate something chilling. Says her mother fled the farm the night before after a violent argument with Andreas, that Viktoria ran into the forest and was found hours later and brought back. Whether this is true or a child's confused memory, we'll never know, but it speaks to the tension crackling through the household in those final days. In that afternoon, Maria Baumgartner would arrive. She's the new maid. Her sister escorts her to the farm, helps her settle in, then leaves. She's likely the last person to see any of them alive. Then on Friday, March 31st, it began. The killer, or killers, lures them out, one by one, to the barn. It is theorized that Andreas was first, then Cäzilia, his wife, Viktoria after her, and then little 7-year-old Cäzilia. They were drawn through the stable into the barn, where someone was waiting with a mattock, a heavy farming tool, part pickaxe and part hoe. The blows were brutal. Andreas' skull was shattered. Cäzilia, the grandmother, dies from repeated strikes. Viktoria is beaten unconscious, and young Cäzilia. The autopsy would later reveal the most horrifying detail of all. She survives the initial attack, left laying in the barn, bleeding, for hours. In her agony, she tears clumps of her own hair out. She's alive at this time, suffering, while the killer moves through the farmhouse, and no one comes to help her. Inside the house, Maria Baumgartner was murdered in her own bedroom. She's been at Hinterkaifeck for less than a day. And then there was 2-year-old Josef. He was killed in his crib. Over the next several days, neighbors would notice smoke rising from the chimney, and so to the outside world, everything was going on as usual, completely unaware at this time of the massacre that had taken place. It was not until April 4th, 4 days after the murders, that anyone realized something is wrong. Young Cäzilia hasn't been to school. The mail is piling up. No one from the farm attended church on Sunday. And so, neighbors grow concerned. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a local farmer and former lover of Viktoria, leads a group to investigate. They find the front door locked, so they head to the barn, and there, they find them. Andreas, Cäzilia, Viktoria, and little Cäzilia. Their bodies stacked, covered in hay, brutalized. Schlittenbauer goes into the house alone. He finds Maria in her bed, and Josef in his crib. Both dead, massacred. By the time Inspector George Gruber arrives from Munich, the crime scene has been hopelessly contaminated. Dozens of neighbors have walked through, touched, and moved things. The damage was done, but Gruber immediately notices the details that will haunt this case forever. The cattle have been fed, meals have been cooked, beds have been slept in. Whoever did this didn't just kill the Grubers, they lived with the bodies, for days. Dr. Johann Baptist A. Müller performs the autopsies on April 5th and 6th. Blunt force trauma to the skull. All 6 victims killed with the same weapon, likely a mattock. Time of death, between 6 and 7 p.m. on March 31st. And the detail that will break hearts, young Cäzilia survived for hours, possibly longer, before finally succumbing to her injuries. The investigation begins in earnest. Over 100 suspects are questioned. Lorenz Schlittenbauer is scrutinized heavily. He knew the family intimately, discovered the bodies, and behaved strangely at the crime scene. But there's no evidence linking him to the murders, and he would later win multiple defamation lawsuits against people who called him the killer. Another theory focuses on Viktoria's presumed dead husband, Karl Gabriel, reportedly killed in World War I in 1914, but his body was never recovered. Could he have returned, enraged to discover Viktoria living with her father under whispers of an incestuous relationship? Multiple people claim to see a man matching Karl's description in the area, but no proof ever surfaces. Others speculate about robbery. Andreas was known to be frugal, rumored to hide money on the farm, but the valuables were left untouched. Nothing was stolen. If it was a robbery, it would be the strangest one in Bavarian history. The mattock, the murder weapon, was eventually found hidden in the attic, covered in dried blood, but it had no fingerprints or any identifying marks. In 1923, less than a year after the murders, the farmstead was demolished. The community wanted it gone, the reminder erased. Some new evidence was discovered during the demolition, including a penknife in the barn hay, but it was too late to really matter. In a macabre twist, the victims' skulls are sent to Munich for forensic analysis. However, they were lost during World War II and never recovered. The Grubers now can't even rest in peace completely. Decades pass. The case goes cold. But in 2007, German police reopened the investigation using modern forensic techniques, and they're able to identify a prime suspect. But, out of respect for the surviving relatives, the name is never publicly released, and without any living witnesses or usable evidence, no charges could ever really be filed. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved. What really happened on that isolated Bavarian farm in March of 1922? The evidence suggests the killer was already inside the Gruber's home. The footprints in the snow leading to the farm but not away, the sounds in the attic, the missing keys, and everything else. Someone really seemed to be living there amongst the Grubers in secret, watching and learning the family's routines, waiting for the perfect moment. The methodical nature of the killings, luring the victims one by one to the barn, speaks to the patience and planning of someone who knew the family, knew the layout, and knew how to isolate them. And the fact that the killer stayed afterward, living amongst the corpses, feeding animals and cooking food. That's not the behavior of a panic murderer fleeing the scene. That's someone who felt comfortable in the Gruber's home. Someone who felt entitled to be there, or was so detached from humanity that 6 dead bodies meant nothing to them. The farmland where Hinterkaifeck once stood is empty now, overgrown. Some say it still feels heavy, that the silence there isn't so peaceful. Travelers avoid it and locals don't speak of it. 6 people died in that barn though. A 72-year-old woman, a 63-year-old man, a 35-year-old mother, a 7-year-old girl who tore her own hair out in agony, and a 2-year-old baby and a maid who'd been there less than a day. And somewhere, in the snowy Bavarian woods and forgotten records, is a name that was never released. Those footsteps in the attic were real. Someone was living there, and on March 31st, 1922, they made themselves known in brutality. The question that will haunt Germany forever isn't just who killed the Grubers, but how long they were watching them. How many nights they spent in that attic, listening to the family below. How many days they walked in those halls before finally deciding it was time. Because the most terrifying possibility isn't that a stranger broke into Hinterkaifeck and slaughtered everyone inside. It's that they already felt like they were at home.